My name is Sarah, and I'm sitting here in my apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, still holding the letter that changed everything. Not the promotion letter, no. That's the one I never got. I'm holding the letter my boss wrote me 3 months later, begging me to come back. But let me start from the beginning, because if I'm honest with you, this story isn't just about workplace betrayal. It's about discovering that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones willing to stab us in the back hardest. Before we dive into what happened, if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to All of Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. I worked at Beacon Solutions, a marketing and analytics firm headquartered right here in Charlotte. We handled major accounts for Fortune 500 companies, and the work was intense, demanding, sometimes brutal, but undeniably rewarding when you saw results. I started there as a junior analyst 7 years ago, fresh out of college with a degree from UNC Chapel Hill and more enthusiasm than experience. My first manager took one look at my portfolio and said, "This girl has potential." She wasn't wrong. Over those 7 years, I clawed my way up from junior analyst to senior strategist. I landed the Google Workspace account expansion that brought in $3 million in annual revenue. I rescued the Amazon logistics campaign when a competitor tried to poach it mid-contract. I built relationships with clients in Boston, San Francisco, and Dallas that stuck because I understood them. I stayed late. I came in weekends. I memorized spreadsheets on my commute. I took calls at 2 in the morning from Tokyo. I did everything a rising professional is supposed to do. Everything. And everyone knew it. My colleagues pulled me into their highest-stakes projects. My boss, Richard Chun, had started trusting me with client presentations by my 3rd year. By year 5, I was practically running the entire digital transformation division. Richard would joke, "Sarah's the real CEO around here." Everyone laughed. I laughed. But I was dead serious about climbing that ladder. Then Petra arrived. Petra Chun, Richard's daughter. She was 26 years old, had just graduated from Duke University with a degree in communications, and arrived on a Tuesday morning in September with a designer handbag and absolutely zero work experience. To be clear, nepotism isn't some subtle disease in corporate America. It's a full-blown pandemic. You watch it happen, you adjust, you move forward. That's how you survive. But what I didn't expect was how blatant it would be. How shameless. On her first day, Richard announced she'd be joining the senior strategy team. Not as an intern. Not in a rotational program. As a senior analyst. On her second day, she was in the conference room for a client presentation about the Microsoft Azure migration project, a project I'd spent 3 weeks developing. She said nothing during the meeting. She sat there, nodding, taking notes that looked more like doodles, and let me do all the heavy lifting. On her 3rd day, the client sent Richard an email complimenting her fresh energy and her innovative perspective. Innovative perspective. She'd said 4 words the entire meeting, but she was Richard's daughter. And she was beautiful and charming, and she laughed at the right moments in meetings. And she had a last name that opened doors I could only dream about. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself my work would speak for itself. That's what they always tell you, isn't it? Your work speaks for itself. What they don't tell you is that sometimes nobody's listening. By the time December rolled around, Petra had somehow gotten her name on the Coca-Cola project proposal that I'd written. The Coca-Cola proposal. The one that could have been my ticket to director level. When I asked Richard about it in his office, he said, "Sarah, Petra needs exposure to major accounts. She's still learning. This is a good opportunity for collaboration." Collaboration. She'd added her name to my work and called it collaboration. I swallowed it. I moved on. I told myself I was professional enough to rise above office politics. I told myself that the promotion cycle was coming up in March, and that's when real merit would matter. I genuinely believed it. Here's the thing about believing in the system knows you believe in it, and it uses that against you. By January, rumors started circulating that Richard was considering me for the director position. 3 people on my team congratulated me before I'd even submitted my formal application. My mom called me from her house in Raleigh and cried happy tears. She'd worked as a nurse for 40 years and never made it past shift supervisor. She was so proud that her daughter was going to be a director at a major corporation. "Sarah," she said, her voice breaking, "you worked so hard for this. You deserve it." I held those words close. I really did. I prepared for the interview like my life depended on it. I researched the company's 5-year strategy. I learned about every major client account. I practiced my answers until my roommate begged me to stop rehearsing in the apartment. I wore my best suit, a Hugo Boss navy blazer that cost me $200 at Belk & Concourse and cream-colored slacks that made me feel powerful. I felt ready. I felt like this was finally happening. The interview was scheduled for Friday, March 15th at 2 o'clock. I was so nervous that morning that I could barely drink my coffee. I made it an extra strong brew for my Nespresso machine, the one I'd bought myself as a little celebration before even getting the promotion, which in retrospect seems like tempting fate. I sat in that waiting area for 15 minutes before Richard and 2 other executives came out to greet me. And then I saw Petra walking past Richard's office. She was wearing a white dress. Not office attire. A white dress like she was going somewhere special. I remember thinking that was strange, but I pushed the thought away. The interview itself went smoothly. I answered every question thoughtfully. I shared metrics and success stories. I talked about my vision for the digital strategy division. The executives nodded. One of them, Margaret, the COO, smiled and said, "Your track record speaks volumes." There it was again. My track record speaks volumes. As if speaking loudly would somehow be enough. When I left the interview, I felt cautiously optimistic. Not overconfident, but solid. Like I'd done everything in my power. I went back to my desk, and my colleagues immediately wanted details. I gave them nothing. I'd learned years ago that premature celebration invites disaster. Instead, I focused on wrapping up a quarterly analytics report for the Dallas office. The day moved slowly. By 5 o'clock, I started thinking about the weekend. I was planning to drive to Raleigh to see my mom, take her to dinner at this Italian place she loves on Fayetteville Street. Maybe I'd tell her then. Maybe I'd make it official first. Around 6:30, Richard sent out a company-wide email asking for the senior strategy team to meet him in the conference room at 7. That was strange. Meetings at that time were rare. But I grabbed my notebook and headed upstairs, my heart starting to beat just a little faster. Everyone was filing in, the 8 members of the senior team, plus Margaret, plus the other executives who'd interviewed me. Petra was there too, sitting next to her father. I took a seat near the back, trying to read the room. Richard looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and started speaking. "Team, I've made a decision regarding the director position that opened up 3 months ago." Everyone went quiet. Margaret put her hand on Richard's shoulder, a gesture of support that made my stomach flip. "I've decided," he continued, "to create a new role. A director of business development position, specifically designed to bring fresh energy to our client acquisition strategy." Fresh energy. Those words landed on me like ice water. And I'm pleased to announce that Petra Chin will be taking that position. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I felt every eye in the room flick to me for a millisecond before looking away. Nobody made eye contact. That's how you know something is truly wrong, when people won't look at you because they're ashamed of what's being done to you. I sat there, completely still, as Richard continued talking about how excited he was to see what Petra would bring to the firm, how she'd already impressed clients with her energy and authenticity, how she represented the future of Beacon Solutions. I stopped hearing the actual words. I just heard fresh energy and the future on repeat. And I realized that my 7 years of 3 a.m. calls and weekend work and rescued campaigns and brought in millions of dollars in revenue meant absolutely nothing. It meant less than nothing, actually, because I'd just spent 7 years building the foundation that someone else's daughter would stand on to reach the position I'd earned. Petra, sitting 2 feet away from me, had the audacity to look shocked. Shocked. Like she didn't know this was coming. Like her father hadn't told her. Like this wasn't the most obviously planned nepotistic move in modern corporate history. She turned to me with this expression on her face that I can only describe as fake sympathy, and she mouthed, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry.
Those two words broke something in me. It wasn't the anger that broke me. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was understanding, with perfect clarity, that Petra would never have to apologize for anything ever again. That she could take what wasn't hers, could step on people who'd worked 5 times as hard as she had, and still go to sleep at night secure in the knowledge that her father would protect her. That her name and her connections would always be enough. And I was disposable. After the meeting, as people shuffled out awkwardly, Richard asked me to stay. We were alone in the conference room. Just him, me, and the ghost of everything I'd thought I'd earned. He started talking about how much my contributions meant to him, how valuable I was to the company, how this wasn't a reflection on my capabilities. He offered me a promotion to Senior Director of Analytics, the same title I'd basically already been doing, with a 6% raise. 6%. Do you know what 6% on a $70,000 salary is? $4,200 a year. That's $40 a week after taxes. He was asking me to swallow the most humiliating professional disappointment of my life for $40 a week. I asked him, very calmly, why he'd created an entirely new position instead of promoting me to the director role I'd interviewed for. He couldn't give me an answer. He said things like strategic thinking and new direction and Petra's fresh perspective, but he couldn't actually explain why I wasn't good enough. He just kept saying, "Sarah, I hope you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that I'd been played. I understood that my loyalty had been used against me. I understood that the nice words he'd given me over the years, the compliments about my work ethic, the jokes about me being the real CEO, had all been hollow. They'd made me feel valued just enough to keep me working 80-hour weeks, but not valued enough to actually promote me. I left his office, without accepting the promotion. I didn't resign either. I walked out into the parking lot in Charlotte, and just sat in my car for 3 hours, staring at nothing. My phone kept buzzing. Text messages from coworkers asking if I was okay. A call from my mom. The news had apparently traveled fast. Another call from my best friend, Jennifer, offering to come over with wine and ice cream. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't even cry. I was too busy understanding that everything I'd believed about merit and hard work and loyalty was a fairy tale told by people who'd already made it to the top. By people with safety nets made of money and last names that mattered. By people like Richard Chen, who could look his hardest working employee in the eye and choose his daughter instead without feeling a single moment of real guilt. I drove home to my apartment in South End, Charlotte, a nice one-bedroom that I'd decorated carefully, that I'd thought would be a stepping stone to a nicer place once I made director. I sat on my couch, still in my Hugo Boss suit, and I made a decision. If I was going to be treated like a disposable employee, I was going to become disposable on my own terms. And while I was leaving, I was going to burn that bridge so spectacularly that every burned bridge that came after would look like a candle. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that I'm not particularly proud of, but I'm honest about it because that's the deal with stories like this. They're only valuable if they're true. Over the next 2 weeks, I started working the system. I gathered every email that showed Petra taking credit for my work. I compiled project timelines that proved she'd been added to initiatives after I'd already done the heavy lifting. I documented every mistake she'd made that someone else had covered for her. I found out about a client presentation where she'd literally read from a script I'd written word for word and let everyone think it was her original thinking. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I just collected information the way you'd collect evidence for a case. Which is exactly what it was. Because I had one more thing I needed to do. I went to HR. I met with a woman named Patricia Davis, who'd been with Beacon Solutions for 20 years. I brought her a folder, an actual physical folder, printed out, highlighted, organized, with every single thing I could prove. She went through it slowly, and I watched her face change. Not to anger, to embarrassment. She knew what this was. She knew this was going to be a problem. I told her that I was resigning effective immediately, but before I left, I wanted the company to understand exactly how egregious the nepotism had become. I wanted it on record that I'd raised concerns about my director interview being overridden by the creation of a new position specifically designed for someone with zero qualifications. I wanted it documented that my work had been systematically taken from me. I wanted evidence that this company had chosen relationships over competence, and I wanted that to haunt them. Patricia tried to get me to stay. She offered me the director position on the spot. She said Richard had made a mistake, that Margaret had gone along with it because she didn't want to cause family drama, that they'd fix it if I'd just give them a chance. But here's what she didn't understand. It was too late. You can't untie that knot. You can't make me believe in the system again once I've seen how completely rigged it is. I told her no. I walked out of Beacon Solutions on a Wednesday afternoon in March and never looked back. For 2 months, I had no job. I applied to 17 companies in the Charlotte area and the surrounding region. I updated my resume, I networked, I interviewed. But I was angry, and angry people don't interview well. Angry people smile too tight and speak too fast, and people can sense that something is off. I went through my savings. I stopped going to lunch with Jennifer. I convinced myself that I was fine with being unemployed, that I was building towards something better, but really I was just slowly imploding. And then one night in May, I got a call from Patricia Davis. She told me that Petra had quit. Just walked out, no notice. Apparently, Richard had given her a real project, a major rebrand for our largest client, and she'd completely botched it. The client had threatened to pull their account. In a panic, Petra had tried to blame a junior analyst for the mess, but the evidence clearly showed it was her incompetence. She'd quit before Richard could fire her. Patricia told me all of this not to make me feel better, but because she wanted me to know that Richard was finally understood what he'd done. That the company wanted me back, and they were prepared to offer me the director position I'd originally been promised, plus $20,000 more than I'd been making, plus a formal apology. I sat on my couch, the same couch I'd sat on that day in March when everything fell apart, and I listened to Patricia talk about how much the company valued me, how they'd made a terrible mistake, how they understood that I had options, and they wanted to show me how serious they were. And I realized something profound. Justice isn't always served in the courtroom. Sometimes it's served by simply being better than the people who tried to pull you down. Petra had sabotaged herself because she'd never actually had to develop competence. Richard had offered me vindication, but not because he'd changed, because his hand was forced. And me? I'd learned something that no promotion, no raise, no formal apology could ever teach me. I'd learned that your self-worth cannot depend on what other people decide you deserve. It has to come from inside you. I went back to Beacon Solutions as a director. I took the raise and the title and the office. But I also made a choice that surprised everyone, including myself. I spent the next year building mentorship programs for junior analysts, particularly women and underrepresented groups. I made sure that the pathway to advancement was transparent and based on metrics, not relationships. I created a culture where the work itself was what mattered. By the time I left Beacon Solutions for an even better opportunity at a tech company in Raleigh, closer to my mom, better benefits, significantly better salary, I'd changed things there. Not because I was vindictive, but because I wanted to make sure that nobody else had to learn the lesson I'd learned. They had to learn it by watching others succeed, not by becoming disposable themselves. The thing is, this story could have been about revenge. It could have been about how I destroyed Petra's reputation or made her life miserable. But that's not what happened. What happened was I became someone who couldn't be destroyed by other people's choices. What happened is I realized that the best revenge isn't vengeance at all. It's excellence. It's thriving. It's moving forward so successfully that the people who wronged you become a small footnote in your success story instead of the center of it. My mom still has the framed director's certificate hanging in her living room in Raleigh. Every time I visit, she points at it and tells the story to her friends about her daughter who worked so hard, who didn't give up, who became a director before age 35. She doesn't mention Petra, or Richard, or the betrayal. She mentions the outcome. And that's the part that matters. I moved to Raleigh 2 years ago and took a position at a healthcare analytics company as their chief strategy officer. I oversee a team of 42 people, Men, women, people of color, people from all backgrounds, and I make sure that every single one of them knows their work matters. I make sure that merit is rewarded. I make sure that nobody ever stands in a conference room feeling disposable. Last month, one of my junior analysts came to me in tears after being passed over for a promotion in favor of a less qualified candidate in a different department. I sat with her, I listened, and I told her something that I wish someone had told me. I said, "Your value doesn't change based on what one company decides. You're going to be amazing, and you're going to find a place that recognizes that. And if this company is too broken to see it, that's their loss, not yours." She left Beacon Solutions, a different company, but the same lesson, and she's thriving now. She's working at a startup in Durham, building something incredible. And last week, she sent me a message that said, "Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to stay somewhere I wasn't valued." That message meant more to me than any promotion ever could have, because I realized that the impact I'd had wasn't limited to my own career. It was rippling outward, affecting the choices and confidence of everyone I mentored. And maybe that's the real secret that nobody tells you about career trauma. It doesn't end when you get your promotion or your raise or your apology. It ends when you transform it into something that helps other people. It ends when you stop letting it define you and start letting it guide you. When you turn your pain into purpose. So, here's what I want you to understand if you're watching this and you've been through something similar. If you've been betrayed by someone you trusted. If you've worked harder than everyone around you and still gotten passed over. If you've realized that the system isn't built for people like you. If you've felt disposable. You're not alone. And more importantly, you're not finished. Petra Chun is probably somewhere right now, living a life that her father's money and her last name continue to buy for her. She'll likely never have to develop real competence or earn her own opportunities. But I'm also not angry about that anymore. Because I realized that feeling angry about her kept me tethered to her story, when I should have been focused on my own. I spent time being furious that someone less qualified got something I deserved. But that time could have been spent building the next phase of my career, developing relationships that would matter long-term, becoming someone so excellent that the question of fairness became irrelevant because my success was undeniable. I don't know if I forgive Richard Chun. I think forgiveness is something that happens on its own timeline, and I'm not there yet. But I don't need to forgive him to move forward. I just needed to stop letting his choices define my value. And I did. And if you're sitting there right now in a situation where someone has betrayed you professionally or personally, I want you to know something. Your response to that betrayal will be more important than the betrayal itself. You can become bitter, or you can become better. You can spend years angry, or you can spend those years building something that makes the anger irrelevant. You can focus on what was taken from you, or you can focus on what you're going to create next. Those are the only real choices you have, and they're the only choices that matter. The promotion was nice. The director title looked good on a business card. The increased salary was necessary. But the real promotion, the one that actually mattered, was the promotion from seeing myself as a victim of circumstance to understanding myself as someone capable of building my own future. And that promotion doesn't come from any company. It comes from inside you. It comes from deciding that you're not disposable. It comes from proving every single day, through your actions and your character and your excellence, that you deserve better than the treatment you received. And most importantly, it comes from extending that understanding to everyone around you, so that nobody else has to learn it the hard way. I'm back here in Charlotte now, by the way. I got hired 3 months ago as the Vice President of Strategic Operations for a healthcare and wellness company headquartered downtown. My team is fantastic. My boss actually listens to my ideas. The work is meaningful. We're building tools that help people manage their health better, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify patterns that human doctors might miss. Last week, a client sent us a note saying that one of our AI algorithms caught a potential thyroid condition in their patient database that would have gone undiagnosed for months. That matters. That actually genuinely, meaningfully matters. And it matters more than any office politics, any betrayal, any moment of feeling disposable. Because when you work on something that makes a real difference in real people's lives, the people who try to hold you back become irrelevant. They become a story you used to tell, not a scar you keep reopening. And that's where I want to leave you tonight. With the understanding that your story, whatever it is, however painful, can become your greatest teacher if you let it. It can teach you about resilience, about the strength you didn't know you had, about the difference between what the world tells you that you deserve and what you're actually capable of achieving. If you've made it this far in this story, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for listening to my pain, for sitting with me in that conference room in March when my world fell apart, for understanding why I did the things I did. And I want to ask you something. If you're listening to this channel for the first time, if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear that they're not disposable, that their work matters, that they're stronger than they think they are, please subscribe to All of Revenge Stories. Help me prove that these stories deserve to be heard. Help me show that voices like mine, like yours, deserve a platform. My mother said I wouldn't make it to 1,000 subscribers with a channel dedicated to telling the truth about career betrayal and professional triumph. She said, "Who wants to listen to people complain about their jobs?" But I believe she's wrong. I believe that people want to understand that they're not alone, that other people have stood where they're standing, that other people have felt the way they're feeling, and that other people have found a way through. So please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me your story or asking me a question. Let me know where you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I respond to as many as I can. And if you know someone who's facing betrayal, someone who's been passed over, someone who's questioning their worth, send them this video. Because that person might be standing at the exact moment where they need to hear that they're not disposable. They might be sitting in their car in a parking lot somewhere, staring at nothing, wondering if they should give up. And maybe, just maybe, hearing my story will remind them that there's another option. There's always another option. Thank you for listening. I'm Sarah, and this is All of Revenge Stories. Let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent.